Coming up, friend of the show, Matthew Newton, finishes up his conversation with nurse practitioner Drew Matey and learns more about the challenges of developing an APP program. You guys are definitely in for a treat, so let's get to it. Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show.
So you single-handedly with a group established the hospital-wide APP program. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, for one, thanks for, helping promote our profession as APPs, but, what did it look like to build? How did it get started? And was it accepted, hospital-wide immediately?
No, obviously, so traditionally these, big education academic centers typically rely heavily on resident workforce in order to take care of patients. And just through time, basically, resident work rules have gone up and actual doctors in training have gone down, and like our hospital just continues to grow. And so they just don't have enough residents to take care of people. And so that's where kind of I came in. And so if you've ever worked at an academic center, large one, a lot of the docs have that mindset of like, teaching and residents. And, to hear about nurse practitioners and PAs, a lot of them refer to them as mid-levels or nurses. And they're just like, what do you do? And it's a lot of it is like bridging the gap of understanding so that they can understand that we are a resource. And I always tell people like, especially, in coming out of school and just general terms, when we're talking to people about proficiencies, it's like, I feel like the nurses, like if you think of a spear, like the nurses can know a ton, right? But like you can only implement so much when you're like hanging the drips, turning the patients, doing the thing, talking to the docs, telling them this is unsafe, talking to the manager, shutting the board, there's like all these things you have to do, transporting the CT. There's like a million things you have to do. So it's tough to be like, to remove yourself from that and think about the diagnoses, where to go, what test to order, right? So like the nurses have a huge chunk of knowledge for that patient. That's like 40%. And then we're like, 41% through like 90, right? So like we got to cover all the other stuff because we're kind of like in there helping out, further assessing the patient, having more conversations with families, having a lot more medical decision-making skills, formulating differential diagnoses, working up the test, passing information, being that liaison. And then the attendings kind of like, because the whole reason is like, if every attending could cover every patient, they wouldn't need APPs, right? And so like you have one doc covering 40 patients, 20 patients, they can't do all that in every single day. Their head will explode. And so like, that's where we come in. And then we formulate the plan, we pass the physician. And a lot of times it's like rubber stamp. And then a lot of times sometimes there's education. And then they're the tip of the spear. So when you're kind of at your end, or if you think you've solved it all, they can kind of be like, well, did you think about this? Right. And so like, and I always tell people, like, look, these trauma surgeons, the least experienced trauma surgeon probably has more experience than 90% of my staff, just by the hours. So if they've been working for 7 years as a resident, that's probably like 12 years of hours for like 40 hours a week, because they don't work 40 hours a week, right? And so like, even if they've just been doing it for 7 years from residency to fellowship to, first year attending, they've been doing it equivalent probably 12 years. So getting people to understand that like, I'm not one of those people that pounds on my chest and say, I'm a nurse practitioner, I don't need no doctor. And trust me, I know that some nurse practitioners don't have a physician, specifically, in these more rural areas and even in some underserved urban areas. But I will say that my people collaborate. It's just we have to know our audience. We take care of huge volume of highly complicated patients. It's just not realistic for us to do it by themselves, nor the physicians. So we collaborate. And I think that's always been the message that I've passed to the physicians. And then when we implemented these new groups, is just, it doesn't happen overnight, right? So you implement a group, they do well, their service gets better. And the other docs are like, we don't want them. And then they're like, wait a minute, they're doing pretty good. We want more APPs. Wait a minute, we need more APPs now that they're here. So it's like a trust building thing, building your brand as a communicator, building your brand as an individual, as a profession. So brand is a spectrum, right? I have a brand. I am who I am at home. I am who I am at work. I am who I am to other people, right? Like I am different things to different people. It's same as your profession and same as, and that's like when we talk about people in our department, you can't do that because then you put a bad name on the department. So we got to all get it together and be on the same page. So it took a lot of conversation. I remember before we hired the first people, we sat in a room for my boss, or it wasn't my boss at the time, was like, y'all gonna sit in this room and not leave until y'all come to an agreement. And so how are we gonna implement these folks? And who's gonna sign off on all the things? And we ended up coming out of there, and in 2018, I had my first 6 people touched ground in June and July, and boom, we moved on since then.
That's great. I'm a big proponent of nurses and APPs and management leadership positions. It is interesting. You talk about collaboration. That's such a hot button topic, even in the CRNA world. And I'm one of those kinds of people that, there are definitely the providers out there that do beat their chest and I don't need a doctor. And, for me, realistically, probably 95% of what I do is independent practice.
Right. Exactly.
But at the same time, though, if I go to an inner city hospital where I have level 1 trauma patients, can I do it by myself? Sure. Could the doctor do it by themselves? Sure. But isn't there, a synergy when people work together?
Agreed.
Do they need each other? No. But for there's certain situations that, I see no problem with that. So and once again, it kind of goes to treating everybody like colleagues and treating everybody like equals, because you get that in kind of all the different fields. Well, so that's excellent that you were able to start this program. I absolutely love it. So I guess speaking on that a little bit, why do you feel it's important for nurses to strive for management and leadership positions within our healthcare institutions?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not for everybody, right? And so just because you're a brilliant provider, as you said, or APP, doesn't mean you're going to be a brilliant manager. However, you can always reinvent yourself. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we have to have leaders. And I think in growing the departments, certain individuals were leaders and they didn't know it, right? And so it was kind of up to me saying hey, you can do this. And then also there's some times where you're like, hey, this maybe not be the right move for you. And those are tough conversations to have. But, but just telling people that maybe this isn't the right move for you at this time. This is what you need to do to get better. Because some people want to be leaders, but don't, there's an appreciation. And I don't know everything it means to be a leader, but I do know some things that you have to have in order to earn respect and be a good leader. It's interesting. My wife is a nurse, and some of the stories she would tell me in the past about some of her managers and directors, it was astonishing. And, some people can lead with an iron fist, and I'm just not one of those people. I'm not good at being mean. Now, I can match your energy if I have to. However, I usually don't come in hot. I usually come in hey, this is what we got to do. And from a leadership perspective, if there's a leader that works with me, in the department, then you kind of got to be nice. I'm a huge proponent of being nice. I don't enjoy being mean, nor do I think some people can do that. I cannot. So to answer your question, very, obviously I'm running around the direct answer is do what's in your heart. If you think that, if you see a manager and you're like, I could probably, either do better or I'm learning so much from them. You're either looking up to them or looking away from them, and you kind of form your own brand as a leader, getting people to do things and be excited about doing things, then follow that. And just because, it ain't available at your institution doesn't mean that it's not available at another institution. And so, I'm kind of blessed and lucky, but if you do the right things in your career, you can be blessed and lucky too. I mean, there's always that saying that, luck is when skill and determination meets opportunity. So like, if you just sit in the house and play computer all day, you're not going to have a lot of opportunities, right? Or you're not going to have a lot of luck because, you can't be lucky unless you go create opportunities.
Well, it's interesting you say create opportunity, because I'm a big proponent of creating opportunity. Even if a healthcare institution or whatever job you're looking for doesn't have your position,
right?
If you make a compelling case and you talk to them and you have your brand, I guess, on point, they'll create a position for you. I got into leadership. I didn't kind of come out of nursing school to say I want to be a nursing leader or I want to be a recognized. I got into it because I've had a number of bad managers or a number of bad coworkers, and I went, man, I'm like, this seems pretty unfair. And what can you do? You can get mad and stamp your feet and be angry at everybody, or you can say, I can do this better. And you take note and you learn, and you increase your emotional intelligence, you increase your knowledge. And that was kind of what spurred me to start my company. It was everybody around me, and back in the day when I started my anesthesia company, I was like, I can do this better. And, staying humble the whole time was important. And then, after that, and after I moved on from my company, I talked to one of the senators in North Carolina like a year or so ago, and she had something that's kind of always stuck with me as nurses. She says, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And I'm like, well, that really does ring true. So like, I feel like as a CRNA, as a nurse, if I can be involved, I guess in some capacity in any leadership role, I can always kind of try to influence us from things that I've seen in clinical, things that I've seen in the business world, and maybe offer a different perspective. So that if it's better than having something handed down that impacts my profession. I would rather be one to impact it in at least the way I think should be, it should be going. Even if I'm wrong, you can have those discussions, but at least it's a moderately educated, view on how things should be going.
Yeah, 100%. Well, when you talk about emotional intelligence, which I think a lot of people, I think before I got into leadership, I don't think I know what that meant. Right. I mean, obviously I feel like I did have some baseline emotional intelligence, but it was somewhat but like as a leader, the higher you go, the less feedback you get, right? The feedback you get is outcomes. Or like, sometimes I have people look at me funny, or sometimes people get a cross tone with me. And I take that as feedback, because a lot of times people aren't going to come to me and say, Drew, you're not doing a good job. Or Drew, I'm like less likely to get reported and stuff like that, just because I'm like, probably because of my position, who knows? But I take outcomes, it's like extreme leadership, right? The outcome's bad. You gotta look in the mirror, right? Like, and you gotta figure out, how do you make it better? If people are always like crapping on you, like you're like, maybe it's something I'm doing. And then like, instead of blaming everybody else, you got to kind of look in the mirror and say, what can I do better? How can I affect the situation better next time?
Yeah. And it's interesting when we talk about like emotional intelligence, because that's something that, we deal with, across the board in every profession. So I guess as a leader, as a manager, if an employee has a disagreement with you, or if an employee is looking for maybe a raise, what's the best way they can approach you and respectfully and professionally ask for that?
Well, I mean, the good news is like, I think as a leader, people can come to me however they want. I mean, the conversation could start out disrespectful, and then it can end great. Like at the end of the day, we just all have to be humble. Like if I screwed up, maybe you can be mad for a little while, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna apologize. I'm gonna say, look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean, obviously my intentions weren't there. The negative intentions, there was no ill intent. So let's move forward. What can we do better? Right? Like, I'm going to do this. how are we going to fix this? So I think, but obviously you got to know to your audience. Like I'm probably pretty forgiving. Like my boss, is, you got to know your audience. Like, and I learn a lot from communicating with him. But at the end of the day, like, you got to know who you're talking to. So the good news is my people that work for me, with me, under me, whatever word you want to use, they can come to me pretty much however they want. But I'm going to meet you where you're at. And then we're going to digress. We're going to get off the soapbox and we're going to come to a solution. So I think there's just so many different ways to engage. And that's kind of being emotionally intelligent, just kind of knowing your audience. I think as a frontline employee, if you come to somebody, as I'm saying, that's why I tell people, like, if you're on rounds and somebody looks at you crazy when you're presenting a patient, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you go to them after the fact and say, hey, I noticed you kind of turn your face sideways when I said X, Y, and Z. What happened? Did I say something wrong? And then it lets them know that you noticed. It lets them know that it maybe made you feel uncomfortable, and then it gives them an opportunity to tell you what they were thinking. And then next time, maybe they won't look at you crazy. Maybe next time they'll just say, you know what, hey, actually, I don't need to hear that today. Maybe we can move on to this. And then your life is like a couple % better. And so I use those feedback things, and I do that to employees. Like, hey, I noticed you kind of like cold this morning. Everything cool? And they're like, I'm just having a rough morning. Great. And then maybe next time they'll be nicer, or maybe they won't. I don't know. But I usually try, if I feel it on me, to bring it up at that point in time, using those feedback mechanisms that people are giving you to kind of create that conversation.
So you've had an exceptional career, from military to nurse to NP to, a community leader for your hospital. For we'll say just a baby RN that's just coming out of school, that's looking for maybe something along similar lines of, how can they progress, through the ranks and, get into upper management. Do you have any advice for somebody like this?
Be humble. I mean, I think, it's interesting when I first got in my current role, well, my previous role, whatever role, when I first came to the place I'm working now, I was like, I want to be like, shoot straight to the top. And then you meet people, like when you meet a really good leader who's like doing it the right way, you'd be like, maybe I'm not ready for that yet. But it took me a while to hit that, to kind of be like, maybe let me sit here for a while and develop myself and get to the next spot. And I think if you're a new nurse, you're coming out of school, you're taking care of patients, you're going to be like, I want to rule the world. And that's great to have that. I think I'm still there in a different way now. I'm just, as you get older, you just get more mature and realize your limitations. When you're young, you kind of don't see the ceiling. But, always take a break and self-reflection and see where you're at, what you're doing, what did your manager say about you? Ask them how you can get better. Ask your preceptor how you can get better. Ask them what's going on. Engage with people maybe you would normally engage with, to be like, hey, what's going on? What do you think? What did you notice in that situation? And that's being humble and just getting feedback. And that's why I tell like APPs to be successful is like, I don't care. You could be the most skilled employee and have a bad attitude. I'd rather have somebody who's middle of the road skilled, just enough to get by, and be a great person to work with. I'd rather have that person than like, Jerry Rice catching touchdowns, but then beating everybody up in the locker room. Like, I can't, that creates a bad team. So like, you just have to be real with yourself and what you're good at and what you're not good at. And part of that's being humble, and that comes with time. So the earlier, the better. So if you're new in your career, know when you're not doing well and get better at it.
Yeah, humility is an interesting thing. There's been a handful of times in my career that I've gotten a little too big for my britches and had someone put me in my place. And, I feel like I've had my humility in check the last 5 years pretty well. But a couple times even at Grady, where I thought I was the smartest guy in the room, and then somebody just put me to shame. And it was like, wow. I mean, like, it really, when you run into these people, it really just makes you take check of where you are. And it's like, I have so much more I need to learn. I have so much more I can do. I really think being humble is one of the biggest, boons you can do for your success in your career. So, when we were talking earlier about like what you specifically do, you listed about 17 different places that you manage in the hospital. I'm sure your phone never turns off. How do you balance work and home life? Does it ever bleed into one another? Or do you have any, how do you separate the two worlds?
Well, I mean, some of it is setting limits. for like with individuals that you work with. Some of it's setting limits with your family. And like there's no limit that has a clear line. It's all gray. But I think that creating balance is, I mean, I think part of it's being efficient at work. So if I mean, like, how do you tell somebody to not talk a lot? But like, I'm talking a lot now. But if we have an hour-long meeting, if the meeting ends in 20 minutes, then we're gonna end it in 20 minutes.
Amen.
Solution. And if there's a bunch of jibber jabber going on, maybe we'll just set up a subcommittee to work on that. Cause like, so it's like, and people know that like if I'm in charge of something, I would hope that it's going to get handled relatively efficiently. And if we have a disagreement, then we just gonna hash it out and we're gonna figure it out. And so like, same with my employees, they know like, and they're not my employees, but they're employees in the department that I'm responsible for. Is like, I think there's a good amount of limits that have been set up over time, but then you always got to break those limits when you need to. Like if you need to be there early, you get there early. If you need to be there late, you get there late. So it's just one of those things that you got to try. Like one thing I would say, if I spent all my time at the hospital, people would be as upset or more upset. But like if you set limits to when you're going to have conversations with people, but my phone's always on, I will tell folks, when have you ever called me and I didn't get back to you? It's never happened. I always get back immediately if it needs to happen. So, I mean, part of it's just setting limits, being efficient, let people solve problems on their own. And like, if you treat people like babies, then they act like babies. If you treat people like adults, then you hope that they act like adults. And if they act like babies, you tell them like, listen, I get it. You're upset, but you've got to figure this out. Like we can't sit here and talk for an hour about nothing. And I understand it's important to you and it's important to me, but at some point you got to move on. So letting people know, and then they might be mad in the moment, but I assume when they're done talking, they'll be like, you know what? I was being petty. I was going over the top. And then next time, maybe they don't do that.
There are definitely some people that will monopolize your time if you allow it. Yeah, I'd always been a big proponent of the 20-minute meeting because I think it's Elon Musk who has the rule that if you're not actually taking part in the meeting, there's no reason to be there.
Right.
I mean, between the charities I've worked with and random jobs I've had, things I've done, I can't tell you how many times I've been just a wallflower in a meeting, and I'm like, man, I could be being productive in my role if you're stuck in this meeting. So I'm a big proponent of. Yeah, let's get to the point. Let's do what we need to do. I had one person I used to work with back in the day where if we had an hour meeting, they wanted an hour meeting because it fit their box. And I mean, even if we got everything accomplished in the first 15 minutes, it had to fit their hour meeting box, which drove me crazy.
Yeah. Well, you're going to deal with that sometimes, but it's a culture thing too. I mean, luckily I have a leader. My one up is pretty respectful of my time and tries to make sure I'm utilized appropriately. So I feel like I have plenty of time, but not everybody can say that. So, and that's one thing I've learned from my leader is like, understand the problem that people are coming to you about. And one thing I know I've heard like my boss has no idea what I'm saying or what I try to have an idea what my people are saying. And if they're saying something to me, I try to understand it. And let them know that I understand it or I'm trying to understand it. And then there's that respect is built and given back and forth.
Excellent. So one of my other favorite questions that I like to ask everybody is, we in life, we always get so caught up on all of our wins and everybody always talks about all the things that have always gone right and how, you became an overnight millionaire or an instant success. Tell me about one of the big L's in your life. What is your biggest failure in your career, your investments in your life, and what did you learn from it?
Well, failure in life, man, I guess I fail a lot. I mean, that's my thing. It's like, the thing is like the only way to get better is to fail. Because if you're like floating on cloud 9 all the time, I mean, how do you get better, right? If you're like the best at all the time, you're just, you're living in a dreamland, number one. And number two, it's literally the whole point of getting better is to realize that you have a point of improvement. I mean, I've failed a lot and I fail every day. I mean, I'm probably failing right now, like in my day, like planning my day. But I don't know. I mean, biggest failure in my career is just like every day you always question yourself. Like, did I show up to work too late? Did I leave work too early? Did I say the right thing to that person? Did I not say the right thing to that person? I kind of look at it on a day-to-day basis and then try to do better the next day. I mean, so unfortunately, and if people who think I'm really good, it's disappointing to know that generally speaking, I'm not that good. And I just try and get better every day. I try to recognize daily failures so I can continue to get better. And I don't like write a diary or create notes or anything like that. I think it's just one of those things that if you're self-aware, you kind of do it on an ongoing subconscious basis. Initially, it may take some writing down, jotting, like what could I have done better today? And then at some point, it just becomes like second nature. But yeah, I mean, family life is always just tough. You're always questioning your decisions. Professionally, I just don't know. I don't think I've really had any huge failures. I think I've made a lot of mistakes, but I try not to make the same mistake back to back. Space it out a little bit, right?
Honestly, I think you hit the nail on the head there when you say I fail a lot and I fail every day. And that's how you need to be. I mean, because if you're not failing, you're not putting yourself out there. And if you're not failing, you're not growing. The key is that you dust yourself off, get back up there, and you fail better next time.
Yeah.
And then that's the thing, is people get so discouraged because they had one setback. I'm an investment person. I love making investments and starting businesses and doing things. And, when I've had a few of them go belly up, and I don't cry about it. I go, okay, well, I dust myself off. I tell my wife I lost money for us. She, she handles that. And then, I go, okay, well, I learned my lessons and this is what I'll do better next time. And luckily, I've had a handful of failures, but I've had more successes than losses. And, that it helps you progress in life. And so I think, like I said, recognizing your failures. And
it's like, to your point about like accepting the failure and dealing with it, like give yourself the time to deal with it, right? Sometimes like, I'm going to bed early tonight. I'm going to get some good rest because tomorrow I'm going to wake up and drink some coffee and get this thing figured out. And knowing that going to sleep, just like if you have a headache, right? If you have migraines or you have a headache, you're going to sleep, you wake up, it's gone. And so you have to deal with failure the same way. Like you give yourself some time to deal with it and then you got to move on to the next one. Because if you just sit there and harp on it, then that you're failing and failing and you're failing and failing, which is like insult to injury. But I mean, none of this stuff like is something you write down or learn. It's just like you got to coping mechanisms. Taking care of yourself is, one way to get over the hump when you do have failures.
And so speaking of taking care of ourselves, as nurses, we go out of our way to take care of our patients and often sacrifice ourselves. As a manager, I'm sure you could work 80 hours a week and still have more to do, but you still need to take care of yourself. So what do you do for Drew? What do you do for your mind and body to stay refreshed, to keep your ability to be able to provide for others?
Yeah, well, I mean, I ride my bike. So I like this morning, I woke up at 4:30. I got all my stuff together and I rode my bike for an hour and a half. And it's a good way to just kind of disconnect. And it's a good way for me to reset. And so I do a lot of exercise. I'm a photographer. So like I take a lot of pictures and edit them and stuff like that. And then, like I tell folks, like you got to find a hobby. Otherwise you'll just like, and I actually really enjoy taking my kids to their sporting events. It's almost like, to me, it's like a Hawks game, like going to my son's basketball game. It's just fun. Like I enjoy watching my kids, soccer games, and just like that is a release for me. But, you just got to take everything as a reprieve. Like even if we go out to dinner, it's like, it's like an event. You enjoy it. So you try and take the little pieces of fun you have and make them your own. And, so I try and disconnect the best I can on the bike is probably my main thing. And then also I have fun at my job. And so like sometimes at my job, I mean, some of the hardest I've ever laughed is at my job, people I work with. And, I'd like to hire fun people. And we have I mean, your wife is hilarious. Like we it's like a lot of good jokes, you know what I'm saying? Because otherwise you're just like staring at somebody every day and you're like, what are we doing here? And it just becomes weird. And so I like to enjoy work and tell jokes and some, I'm sure some people probably think I'm corny, but such is life. At least they like genuine laugh. So even at work, you can have some disconnect throughout the day.
I think that's one of the keys though, especially when it comes to work. Work is always, oh gosh, I gotta go back to the grind. Honestly, like I love my job. I love what I do. As a CRNA, not to have a big head, I have the ability to kind of go anywhere and do what I want. If I want a great paying job, I can go have a great paying job. If I want more time with my family, I can find that. If I want to go work, 24-hour shifts, you have a lot of flexibility. So that being said, as CRNAs, as nurse practitioners, as medical providers, we choose where we work. So, I always tell people, I'm like, if you're unhappy as a medical provider, it's your fault because you either are allowing a bad work environment or you've chosen the wrong place. So go find somewhere that makes you happy because you have to love what you do. I love where I work. Is it frustrating and hard at times? Absolutely. But it's also lets me have these challenges that I can overcome. Lets me work with great teams of people. My upper management is fantastic to work with. And every day I go in, I have a new challenge. I have something new I can do. And it's very fulfilling. Yeah. So, like I said, I love what I do. So I never get up in the morning and go, damn, I got to go to work. And I think that's one of the keys that people miss out on in life is they're stuck in their situation or they're just, they get so caught up in their world that they stop trying to improve their surroundings and improve their life.
Well, it's like, people ask me like, what's your best job you've ever had? I'm like, dude, every job's the best job I've ever had. And I know that sounds corny, but it's true, man. When I worked at FedEx driving trucks, like I had when they switched managers, this guy used to ride me like terrible. But you know what? It was just another hump I had to get over. I mean, in my job currently, there's plenty of issues I have with different individuals, but you know what? It's not fun, but it's a challenge trying to figure out either how can I get better to solve it or how could they get better and how do I get them to see on the same page as me? But I just try to make every job that I've had like fun, even when I worked at McDonald's and when I was 14 and when I worked at the bike shop, and CVS and all the different stuff I've done. I mean, I have a lot of fun. So, I try to use it as because you got to be there 40 hours a week at least, right?
I completely agree. And I think that since you're able to identify these things is, part of the reason that people like you are successful is you go, okay, here are the good things in life and let me embrace them. And I think that's just very important to our general happiness. But Drew, this has been absolutely a great conversation. Yeah. For our listeners, I'm sure they are going to get a lot of value out of everything that we've discussed. We're going to have all of Drew's contact info in the show notes. If anybody would like to, approach him for any advice in life, career, or, maybe looking for employment or anything of the sort. So please feel free to reach out. And aside from that, Drew, thank you so much for having you on. It's been great.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
There were so many nuggets to take away from Drew's conversation, from his time in the Navy when he just had to jump in and figure things out, to recognizing the amazing effect that others have had on his personal and professional journey. He recognized the role of PTSD in his life, which is something I feel like the military community has greatly improved upon, but the nursing community still tends to gloss over. Drew also mentioned the importance of relationships, creating and cultivating them over time, which might actually be preparing you for a leadership position that you never realized you could be good at. Leadership isn't about being a jerk to others and making them do what you want. It's about collaboration and respect of other people. Part of that is looking for and accepting feedback. And that's something that takes a certain amount of emotional intelligence. And the good news is that trait can be learned and improved over time, mainly by listening to others and approaching situations with a sense of humility and compassion. The same applies to approaching our failures. We are human after all, and we make mistakes. We can take the time to learn from those mistakes, but ultimately, we can't let those mistakes define us. That's going to do it for the show. For those of you who want to learn more about Drew and his journey, make sure you check out the show notes for his contact info. This is Bobby Jones signing off. Until next time, stay safe and take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.